He's the best defender in baseball at a position that's being targeted, challenged by robots. Challenge being a key word there. It's no surprise Patrick Bailey not a fan of the ABS system.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, hosting this show since prior to the 2019 season, and I'm a lifelong Giants fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, so check us out there if you have not already, and please hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you're following the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And coming up on today's show, there are a few things I want to get into, and the first is discussing an article by Michael Bowman of Fangraphs, and the title of the article is Patrick Bailey, Luddite, and then in parentheses, complimentary. So I know the word Luddite, but I had to look it up just to make sure. And broadly speaking, according to Merriam-Webster.com, it is one who is opposed to especially technological change. And so, again, I don't think Bailey is just generally opposed to technological change in general and probably in baseball either. But when it comes to the automatic ball strike system, ABS system, which is being tested out in spring training, not at every ballpark, but it is in some ballparks this spring. And, I have mixed feelings on this as a Giants fan currently, because for the longest time, I've wanted this, but at the same time, it is a fact that when you have the player who is by far the best pitch framer in baseball, you stand to lose more than anybody else by implementing a system that starts using a robotic strike zone as opposed to the strike zone as called by umpires who are influenced by framers such as Patrick Bailey. And Bailey just lapping the competition, as we'll read in this article. So Michael Bowman cites Andrew Baggarly, who talked to Patrick Bailey at the beginning of camp about the ABS system being tested out in spring training. When the league starts testing things out in spring training, this is, to me, probably going to be something that does come into the game in 2026, next year, not this upcoming year, but in 2026. And so I'll just throw that out there. But Bailey said this. He said, quote, "I think it's going to change the game a lot more than people realize." So right there, he's speaking like it's going to happen. I think it's going to change the game a lot more than people realize. It's going to take a lot of value away from defensive catchers. I don't think it's going to be good for the game. So pretty clear on his position there. And Bowman notes that Baggarly also talked to retired catcher Tyler Flores, who was a great pitch framer in his own right. And Flores said, quote, "Thank goodness I'm not playing anymore. I'd be out of a job," end quote. And then Bowman continues, he says, "I understand and empathize with Bailey's position. I don't think it's even a little hyperbolic to call him the best pitch framing catcher who ever lived." Let that soak in for a minute. And I agree, and I'll explain why. He explains why, but I'll emphasize that I agree with his logic here, Bowman's logic. Bailey's numbers would be bonkers in any era, but are exponentially more impressive now that framing is a core competency for catchers as opposed to the early 2010s. Back then, as we were just starting to learn about how to quantify framing, performance was much, much more variable. And so, yeah, it's like now we know how important it is. And so it's a core thing that's being valued and taught and all that. And yet Bailey is in that era where it's never been more valued. He is like far and away lapping the competition in this regard. And I've said this a gazillion times on this podcast, but framing adds more value than any of the other traits that a catcher does defensively. I'm not talking about intangibles. I'm talking about the actual physical things that they do. And so when you talk about blocking, you're like, oh, he's not a great ball blocker. Well, that matters just so much less than framing in terms of the runs saved, prevented by framing. So Bowman goes on. He says, to lose even a run or two in framing value could be significant for a player like Bailey. He was a 4.3 WAR player last year in just 121 games. For his career, he's produced 7.0 WAR in 801 plate appearances, which is a ratio of 1 win every 114.4 plate appearances. This, despite Bailey's career slash line being a 234 average, a 292 on base, and 348 slugging. Get this, though. For context, this is still Bowman writing here. For context, Francisco Lindor, for his career, has produced 1 win every 112.8 plate appearances, which is just a little bit lower than Bailey's 114.4. He's also an elite defender at a premium position. He's an elite shortstop, and his career batting line is a 274 average versus 234 for Bailey, 342 on base versus 292 for Bailey, and 476 slugging versus 348 for Bailey. So both premium defenders at premium positions, and Bailey's been basically as valuable according to WAR calculations, that's just how critically important framing is, which is an argument in favor in general of the automatic ball strike system, because in general it's such a critical thing and mistakes are made constantly with this critical, because the count, every single pitch, whether it's an 0-0 count, whether it's a 2-strike count, whether it's a 2-1 count, and the difference between 2-2 and 3-1, it just makes a dramatic difference in the expected outcomes of a given plate appearance. And this is just happening constantly throughout every single game. Every pitch, it makes a huge difference in outcomes, whether it's a strike or a ball. So anyway, Bowman continues. He said, given how much Bailey has to lose, it makes sense that he's taking a hard line against ABS of any kind. Though I do wonder how much of a dent, if any, the challenge system would make. The proposed system takes care of obvious missed calls, like if the umpire sneezes at a bad time and misses a fastball right down the middle. I don't think anyone needs, or even especially wants, a millimeter perfect imaginary box in the sky. And until and unless we get that, Bailey and his contemporaries will still have room to operate. I will just say, I know plenty of people who do want, who argue that if we're going to do this, it should be all the time and not a challenge system. It's worth pointing out, too, that the challenge system is really fast. If you've ever watched pro tennis back when, I think now they do fully automatic or autonomous or whatever. But the challenge system in tennis, MLB uses that same technology, the Hawkeye system. It's really fast. It's not like they go to the headset every time there's a challenge strike. It's like the batter just taps on their helmet, or the pitcher or the catcher, and within 10 seconds, the whole process is over. They just play it on the scoreboard. They show the little animation, and whether it was a ball or a strike, and then boom, the game moves on. And so continuing on, Bowman says, I guess there's no limit to the number of successful challenges a team can make, but it's unlikely that an opposing lineup would be able to identify every borderline call Bailey gets without being wrong more than once. I'll add, or twice. If the other team does somehow manage to reel off 10 or 15 successful challenges, they'll have earned whatever advantage they gain from nullifying Bailey. Bowman says, I'd argue that the further the strike zone gets refined, the more Bailey's framing would shine. I know catchers don't like to think of framing as stealing strikes, but if you've seen a heist movie, you know that anyone can pick up a bag of cash that's been dropped on the sidewalk. It takes a real master to break into the vault of the Bellagio on a fight night, and Bailey is the Danny Ocean of framing. So coming up in just a minute, we're going to continue this fun conversation, and we're going to get into some other things going on in spring training, like Robbie Ray having a really good outing yesterday, what he's done overall in the spring, and Landen Roupp, another amazing outing today on the backfield. So all that in just a minute. And before we get into it, today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. And with this $200 bonus bet offer, if your first $5 bet wins for new customers, just choose the most lopsided odds you can find, place your $5 bet on that. Hopefully it comes through, and then there you go, 200 in bonus bets. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, here we go. More on Patrick Bailey, his pitch framing ability. Also, Robbie Ray being an X factor for the Giants. Oops, I realized one of my lights is not. There we go. Much brighter. Anyway, thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers on Monday. Mailbag Monday on a Monday for a change. If you're an everydayer, you know what I'm talking about. So look out on Twitter for the prompt either tonight or over the weekend. We'll get a fresh batch of questions to be answered. Also, some leftovers from the last time we did this. There are plenty. So anyway, moving on through this article, Bowman, given that it is Fangraphs, there is a little bit of like numbers crunching that goes on here. And yeah, so what the Danny Ocean of framing and breaking into the vault of the Bellagio on a fight night. Thought that was a really cool little couple of sentences right there. Anyway, Bowman continues. He says, still, just for fun, let's zero out everyone's framing numbers. So they're like, what happens if we take out framing from players, including Patrick Bailey, the best? He says, over the past 2 seasons, Fangraphs WAR numbers have Bailey as the best defensive catcher in baseball, 62.6 runs above average, including positional adjustment. So he gets credit for being a catcher, which he should, versus like a first baseman. If he was a first baseman, like he wouldn't be in the league, at least while he's hitting how he's hit. He's had hot streaks, but he's also then had very cold streaks. Anyway, it says including positional adjustment and about 20 runs better than second place Cal Raleigh, who I think won like a platinum glove last year and Bailey didn't, which kind of ticked me off. Bailey's 20 runs better than him, I guess, over the last 2 seasons. And anyway, the numbers on StatCast are similar. Bailey's the best in the league by 16 runs. Take framing out of the picture, and Bailey falls to 21st out of 63 catchers, 0.95 runs above average versus 62.6 in total. It turns out that a weighted runs created plus of 80 is not great out of context, but for a catcher, it's not that bad, especially for a catcher who, it bears repeating, does a lot of things well defensively apart from stealing strikes. Among the catchers Bailey has covered, even without considering framing, Travis d'Arnaud, Francisco Alvarez, by the way, a very highly touted prospect, Bailey was not, Alejandro Kirk, and Jonah Heim. Non-framing Bailey is within half a run of Logan O'Hoppe, who's pretty decent. So should Bailey be throwing his spikes into the gears of the ABS machine? And then in parentheses, I don't think that's how it works, but indulge me. I'm committed to the metaphor. End parentheses, maybe. With framing, he's one of the best catchers in the league. Without it, he's average. But even full ABS all the time wouldn't cost Bailey a spot in the majors. Again, without framing, he's average. Even though framing is a huge part of his game, he does plenty of other things well. And that's the end of my quotes from this article. I just thought it was really fascinating, and I want to hammer home to anyone who has any doubts about this just how valuable Patrick Bailey is defensively, and being called here the best framer who's ever lived. So when he came up, a lot of people wanted to compare him to Buster Posey immediately, and I said, pump the brakes on that. But like Yadier Molina, yeah, I think that's more like what you're looking at. He's just that good. And so it's a little different than Molina. Molina famously like controlled the running game really, really, really well. And Bailey, it's mostly about framing, but his throwing numbers and pop times and all that are elite as well. It's the blocking that's not terrific. It's like the only thing defensively he doesn't do terrifically, but it's the least important of the things that catchers do defensively. So anyway, just food for thought as we contemplate how ABS may be showing up, but that should be a point in favor if you had to choose of the challenge system versus just full-blown every pitch is called by the computers, And to me, that's what I'm in favor of, even before considering like trying to take my bias out of it, because aesthetically, if you didn't need to frame, I just think that would look ugly, basically, is why I like the challenge system. And it just prevents those critical game-changing calls versus like every single pitch. Although I definitely know people who are in favor, and I understand why, of every single pitch just being called correctly. I just think it would look ugly, and it would cost players jobs, like who that's their skill set. And so I don't know that you want to do that. It would change the catcher position dramatically, and I don't know that you want to do that. But that's just my opinion. Anyway, moving on. There's an article or two or three. They all got into Robbie Ray, who pitched yesterday. We even discussed Robbie Ray yesterday. He pitched, and then we broke down the numbers. But now we've got some quotes and stuff after the game. Alex Pavlovich wrote an article for NBC Sports Bay Area that was titled, "Armed with New Pitch, Giants Lefty Ray Looking Like Old Self." And Pavlovich writes, Robbie Ray, who continues to work on his changeup, found that the wind was surprisingly helpful. It's been like rainy and windy in Scottsdale, which is a new thing over the last 5 to 10 years that didn't used to seem to happen at all. It allowed his off-speed pitch to appear even slower than it usually does. And then Robbie Ray said, quote, "It was almost like it just never got to the plate," he said of the changeups he threw. The pitch is a new one with a grip borrowed from American League Cy Young Award winner Tarek Skubal. Ray thinks it could be a game changer in his second full season with the Giants, and right now it looks like he might have the same effect on the rotation. Ray gave up a wind-aided homer, but otherwise was dominant against a Texas Rangers lineup that was filled with regulars. He struck out the side in the first and struck out 8 overall in 4 1/3 innings. In 3 Cactus League appearances, Ray has 17 strikeouts and no walks in 9 1/3 innings. So that no walk, both numbers really jump off the page. But Robbie Ray, like one of his biggest issues in his career, if he's had one, has been walks, and no walks and 17 strikeouts. I know it's spring, but like command is command. Like if you're not walking people, that's hard to fake, right? You're throwing strikes. And after the latest appearance, manager Bob Melvin called it, quote, "a different look from last year." And Melvin said, "We've seen him this spring look like Robbie Ray again." I would even argue, this is Ben talking, a different version who's throwing strikes all the time. Right now, his stuff looks like it did before. Okay. So Pavlovich said the Rangers were a particularly good test Thursday, and not just because they brought a bunch of regulars across the valley. The first 8 batters in Bruce Bochy's lineup batted right-handed, which allowed Ray to repeatedly test his changeup against the pitchers it is meant for. And Ray said, it's just another look and something that has some arm side movement, something I don't normally do. Everything I threw before is kind of hard into righties, like firm velocity when it's coming in to righties. You've seen it so far this spring. It's been really effective getting righties off my fastball in. It doesn't necessarily have to be a swing and miss pitch. It's just something that gets them off my swing and miss pitches. I definitely think it's going to be a big pitch for me. And Shayna Rubin of the Chronicle adds another little quote in her article, Giants Robbie Ray committed to his new changeup, quote, a huge pitch for me. And then she says, or Ray says within the article, it's a huge pitch for me. It's another look at something that has arm side movement. Wait, this is the same quote. Yeah, sorry. I thought that was not a duplicate. But then there's Maria Guardado adds a new quote in an article that we're going to get to in just a minute about the Giants DH situation. She mentions Robbie Ray, and she goes, left-hander Robbie Ray was charged with 2 runs on 3 hits, including a solo homer to Adolis Garcia, lowered his spring ERA to 193 over 3 starts, and he's embodied the Giants' emphasis on strike throwing this spring. And Guardado gets a quote from Ray who says, as long as you don't walk guys, so this is about the walks here now, as long as you don't walk guys, you're giving your team a chance, said Ray, who threw 65 pitches. It's definitely to keep the hitters on the defensive. Hitters don't like hitting when they're behind in the count. So let's just get ahead of guys and put them away. And so that also speaks to what we were talking about initially with the pitch framing thing, is that hitters, when they're behind in the count, it makes a huge difference in their expected outcomes. Hence the emphasis on strike throwing. When you as a pitcher fall behind in the count, it puts you in a hole and it forces you to come into the zone, and then hitters just have way more success. And so if you get ahead, if you can just pound the strike zone, it does lead to better results. The best pitching teams in baseball walk the fewest guys. Like, it's just how it goes. And the teams that walk the most guys, like, generally are the worst pitching teams in baseball. And when the Giants were really, really good and won 107 games, if I recall, they had the fewest walks in the game too. And so, but that's kind of reversed a little bit in recent years. And guys like Ray, who have a history of not always being strike throwers, for him to be doing what he's doing this spring is super encouraging. And with the new pitch borrowed from Tarek Skubal, who has a nasty changeup and is very good, and Skubal helped him learn the changeup over the offseason. Thank you very much, Mr. Skubal of the Tigers. Robbie Ray, definitely an X factor for the Giants heading into 2025. So coming up in just a minute, we get an update, perfectly timed, as we discussed like a month-old article from, I forget who wrote it, but it was citing Bob Melvin, who said the DH spot, like he just couldn't really, it's the one spot he couldn't pin down. Well, now a month later, what does Bob Melvin have to say about this position in the lineup and where it stands with the guys in camp, and what are the options? Who's going to be that DH on opening day? Who's going to take down the most DH at bats when all is said and done at the end of the year? We'll get into it. And a few other notes, including, my goodness, Landen Roupp's outing in the backfields today, in just a minute. And before we do, today's episode of Locked On Giants is brought to you in part by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. All right, here we go. We're going to get into Bob Melvin commenting on the latest on the DH situation and some notes on a couple of key players who figured to make the team and what they've done this spring and why that's probably why they're making the team. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. Everydayers coming up next week, our last week without Major League regular season baseball, although the regular season is starting in Tokyo, I think, on Monday with the Dodgers and the Cubs. But for the Giants, it's 2 weeks from yesterday. And so, yeah, next week is our last week without real Giants games to get into at the back end of the week. Anyway, continuing on, this article is from Maria Guardado of sfgiants.com called Giants Change DH Approach with Flores and Encarnación leading candidate. So this is basically what we concluded yesterday, but it's just good to get an update because, as I said yesterday on the show, it was a month-old article that I was referring to, and I was thinking nothing had really changed, but it's good to get some comments from Melvin a month later after he made his initial ones. So Melvin said after the Giants game yesterday, Flores is swinging the bat really well, or pretty well, so is Encarnación. And then you always want to potentially target a day for Chapman, a day for Adames, a day for whoever. We'll spread it around some. I don't see one particular DH. And Melvin continued, it depends on performance too. If we have somebody that gets hot, like an NC, that'd be Encarnación, and he's on the team and he's providing some power, he could get a lot of those reps. Same thing with potentially Flores. It depends, or it allows us to get Flo at first and maybe Lamont Wade Jr. some DH at bats too. We'll figure it out. And so, yeah, the end quote. And so the plan clearly to spread it around some, but the primary guys looking like, I mean, I would say Encarnación is more of an obvious fit because Flores looks like a platoon partner with Wade. Flores, as I have said, and I'll continue to say, not good defensively anywhere but first. At first, he's fine, but at other positions, not so much at all. But at first, historically, he's been fine. So, Flores was hurt last year. He was not good, but he was hurt. And so Guardado points out, Flores has looked more like himself now that he's back healthy this spring, hitting .286 with 1 homer in 11 Cactus League games. And Melvin said his at-bats are way different right now. He's driving balls to left field. He's hitting some fastballs. I think last year he was really affected by the leg, and it just looks like different at-bats this spring already. Guardado says Flores' seniority should make him the front-runner to start at DH on opening day, though the Giants have also been intrigued by Encarnación, who's batting .316 with 1 home run and a team-high 13 RBIs over 14 exhibition games. And Encarnación made a little comment. He said, I'm really happy for the opportunity and very proud of the work that I've been doing, he said in Spanish. As long as I'm in the lineup, I'm good. I can't complain. As long as I'm there, praise be to God. All right. So, yeah, I've mentioned this a bunch, but Encarnación is out of minor league options. He's only 27 years old. He comes with a ton of team control. And so given what he did in the Mexican League last year, which was crazy, like 19 homers in like 24 games or something, the Giants signed him to a minor league contract out of Oaxaca, and he went on to crush it in AAA. And they called him up, and the expected numbers were really good, even though the actual numbers weren't great. So there's no reason, he's doing just fine this spring, to not have him on the team, and so I think he'll get his shots. Good ballpark to open up in, too, in Cincinnati, the Great American Small Park, although the Reds have some good pitching, especially on opening day. So maybe that does make Flores the guy who makes more sense to be in there if it is Hunter Green they're facing on opening day, which is who they're likely facing. So some other notes. Landen Roupp in particular pitched today, Friday, and little couple of different twists on the same outing. Alex Pavlovich tweeted out, quote, Landen Roupp pitched over on the minor league side today and struck out 13 in 5 innings, including the first 9 batters he faced. Worth noting that Bob Melvin skipped the Cactus League game to go watch Roupp, who is competing for the 5th spot in the rotation. And Shayna Rubin of the San Francisco Chronicle said Landen Roupp struck out 13 batters and walked 1 and allowed 1 hit on 66 pitches over 5 innings in a game at Papago today. Papago Park is their, minor league facility, but the major leaguers use it too. So it's just their spring training complex, Arizona complex. Anyway, I don't know how exactly to describe it, but my goodness, I mean, do those numbers jump off the page? 13 strikeouts in 5 innings, including 9 consecutive batters struck out to start the game. I don't know what level of hitter he was facing here. It's minor league camp, and so I would imagine, plenty of AAA, AA players, and he just absolutely overpowered them. And so an outing like that can just be a deal breaker for everybody else competing for a job, because I noted this last weekend. Landen Roupp's game was televised by the Cubs, and I watched him pitch, and it looked like he was kind of fighting his command a little bit, but he still managed to be effective. And then on days when he's not fighting his command, you get stuff like this. And so Landen Roupp, a guy to definitely pay attention to, and looking like maybe the clear front runner to be in the rotation on opening day. And he had a good season last year after starting slow in the bullpen and finished out the year making some starts, and he was really good in those starts. So two other notes. Pavlovich says hello from Maryville, where Luis Matos kicked off the day by hitting a long homer to left off Nestor Cortez. And Nestor Cortez is a big leaguer, going to be in that Brewers. He was traded from the Yankees to the Brewers, going to be in their rotation, and Matos hit a long homer off of him. Pavlovich says Matos entered the day with a 359 spring average, and that he's doing everything necessary to lock up a spot to earn the right field starts against lefties. And so that's what I made a 26-man roster prediction yesterday, and that's exactly what I said. And then the hope being that he kind of breaks out like Elliot Ramos last year and takes over a job, because Yaz is entering the last year of his contract. He's going to be, I think, 36 later in the season, Yastrzemski, whereas Matos is 23. So finally, right-hander Keaton Winn started a minor league game at the Giants Player Development Center at Papago Park on Thursday and gave up 1 run on 3 hits over 2 2/3 innings. He walked none and struck out 4 in the 39-pitch effort. So it just stood out to me, another Giants player who didn't walk anybody in an outing. It's just, we're seeing that time after time after time. And the Giants have the best record in spring training of any team, and their pitching and strike throwing has been a big part of it. We'll see how well that carries over into the season. Sometimes too much strike throwing can not, then the hitters just hit you. So we'll see. But just stood out to me that just yet another Giants starter throwing strikes and nothing but strikes, or not walking people. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On MLB. Baseball guru Sully brings a daily blend of humor and baseball, keeping you updated on every rumor and story throughout the offseason. Find Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, my name is Ben Kaspick. Check me out on Twitter or X at Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please consider rating it or leaving a review. It helps me out so much. So thank you in advance, and thanks to everyone who's done so already. I can't wait to be with you again on Monday. Have a great weekend. Thanks again for listening. You are now Locked On Giants.